You're listening to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories.
I've had rather strange experiences in my life. I'm 17 now and have never really been too scared by anything that's happened to me. I grew up in an older trailer park, so as young as 8, friends and I would go around with tape recorders trying to explain the weird things that would happen to us. On one occasion, we even had some heavy metal pliers thrown at us from across the room several times, and each time the pliers fell 2 inches from our feet and were always facing the same direction. Needless to say, the paranormal isn't a new thing for me. I've lived with my grandmother in the same apartment for about 3 years, and it's an older apartment building, and it's for people over 62, so it's very common for people to pass away in the building. I can live there because my grandmother has legal custody of me, by the way. One night, I was on the couch and saw a human figure crouching suddenly run from one end of the room to the other and leave through the wall. The figure was all black and crossed right in front of me. I often see similar shadow figures standing near the dining room table at night when I get a snack. The really interesting thing about these at-night experiences, though, is that my cat will usually follow me when he hears my door open, and every time he sees something, he arches his back and hisses. It's the only time he ever hisses. These experiences have never really bothered me, since they seem to pay me no mind. But the first experience that made me start thinking a little differently happened to me about 7 months ago. I was home alone with my cat in the middle of the afternoon, which is a pretty common occurrence for me, and why I think I have so many more experiences than my grandmother or my mom, who often stays for the weekend. I like to keep my lamp unplugged when it isn't on and leave the switch on, so I just plug it in and unplug it. I was in the kitchen that afternoon when my doorknob unlatched, swung open, and slammed shut. When I went to investigate, I found my lamp had been plugged in. No windows were open, and the door is rather difficult to open anyways because the knob is messed up. When I told my grandmother about it, she was very skeptical, but we couldn't find any reasonable explanation. Just a few weeks later, I woke up at about 3 a.m. to my closet door repeatedly sliding open and closed. It wouldn't stop, and it went on for about 20 minutes, and I ended up sleeping in the living room. That hasn't happened since. Things calmed down for a few months, except for an occasional shadowy figure, actually seen by my mom one time. But everything started ramping up in ways I've never had to deal with. One thing that really frightened me happened about 2 weeks ago. I was taking a shower, and when I turned the water off to get out, the shower curtain opened all the way by itself. There was an indent in the curtain about 4 feet off the floor, like a hand pulling it. There was no figure I could see, but it was one of the first truly terrifying experiences I've ever had. I was home alone at the time and refused to go back in the bathroom until my grandma came home about 4 hours later. Then, exactly a week ago, I was in the bathroom around 3 a.m. with my cat when we heard someone pacing outside the door. I say we because my cat became very alert. We heard the trash can being used, and then we heard it right outside the door. The knob started turning, and I said, "Wait a minute, someone's in here," because I thought maybe it was my grandma. I opened the door, and there was nothing there. And even my cat kept looking around, trying to find something. My grandma was asleep. I could hear the same footsteps outside of my closed door until I finally fell asleep. And most recently, last night, I was again in the bathroom around 3 a.m. I heard footsteps come from my grandma's room to outside the door, and the knob started turning, and again I said someone was in there. But this time, the knob kept wiggling for a few seconds until the door swung open, with no sign of anyone there. These past 3 experiences are really the only ones in my life that have been particularly disturbing. I don't know if this is something, just wanting attention, or perhaps some sort of poltergeist. My mother thinks I may be more sensitive to these things since I have so many experiences. My grandmother is no longer skeptical about the weird things that have happened to me. Any thoughts on the matter would be greatly appreciated. There's this little girl who lives in our neighborhood who says the most disturbing shit on a regular basis. She's very creepy and is always talking to herself. One day, the neighbor texted me and asked if I could watch her little girl while she took the older boys to the doctor. And of course, I didn't mind. The boys were sick. So the little girl comes over, and I tell her she can watch TV or go downstairs to play in the craft room, which was just basically a room full of yarn and fabric with a quilting table in it. I mean, nothing breakable or dangerous. And she chose the craft room. She was down there playing with her dolls and talking the entire time, and I can see straight into the basement and hear her perfectly from the kitchen. That's where I am, making birthday pies for a friend, and I was starting to listen to what she was saying. She was having a really weird conversation, saying things like, "Well, my mom doesn't go to church either," and "People think God is fake, like my mommy's friends," and "Church shoes hurt my feet. Maybe that's why she doesn't go." So I go downstairs and ask who she's talking to, and the conversation goes something like this. Me: "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" Neighborhood kid: "The priest who lives here." Me: "What priest? I'm not a priest." Kid: "Girls can't be priests." Me: "Well, that's very true, but," insert my husband's name in here, "and my father-in-law aren't priests." Neighborhood kid: "I know," insert my husband's name here again, "he makes swords. A priest lives here too." Me: "No, the priests and penguins live in another house, down the street." Neighbor's kid says, "Nope, one still lives here." Me: "Sweetheart, people from the church live down the street, not here." Neighbor's kid says, "You don't know who's in your house all the time with you, do you?" Okay, at this point I just go back upstairs because I feel foolish for arguing with a small child, and she's freaking me out a little bit. I don't even mention this to her or anyone else. We find out about 2 months after this that our house had been at one time owned by the church about 80 years ago and was sold to private owners about 60 years ago. I know she could have overheard someone saying something about our house, or she could have been playing a child's game, or any number of other solutions. However, this kid is always saying shit like this. This is not an isolated incident. According to my mother-in-law, she was over here the other day and said something like, "Your grandma thinks so-and-so is too nosy." And my mother-in-law said, "Honey, my grandmother is dead." And this kid poker-faced it up and said, "I know," and walked away. Yesterday she was over here playing in our yard, and she asked me if I had said anything bad about a certain man. When I said no and asked why she would ask me that, she got up from her swing and said, "The man who follows you looks mad at you. Also, his bird is gone." And then, as casually as she can say, she says, "Can you help me weed your garden?" Also, things go missing if she comes near our house. I mean, she doesn't even have to come into our home. She just has to be on the property. We'll all be searching for things like keys and books, wallets, coats, shoes, everything for days, sometimes weeks. This girl is weird.